As mentioned in the introduction, the Clean Air Act regulates mobile sources as a system whereby engines, fuels, and vehicle performance are all regulated. Let's go ahead and begin with the engines. Unlike permit programs for other pollutants, engines are regulated as part of a certification program. EPA regulates the engines to meet a specific limit on emissions. The Act focuses on 4 pollutants from mobile sources: carbon monoxide, hydrocarbons, nitrogen oxides, and particulate matter. Nitrogen oxides contributes to the ozone problem, and particulate matter is the most dangerous for human health, and it comes primarily from diesel combustion. The law gives EPA the authority to regulate any air pollutant on any new vehicle or engine if the pollutant causes or contributes to air pollution, which may reasonably be anticipated to endanger public health or welfare. You may recall this as the endangerment finding. Once this is made, it's difficult to undo, as the Trump administration discovered with carbon dioxide. EPA selects a standard that it believes is generally achievable within the industry if given sufficient lead time to develop, and lead times can vary but are usually 3 to 4 years. The law is known to force technology adoption among the vehicle and engine industry, which historically has been recalcitrant about reducing emissions, which it fears cuts into engine performance. EPA allows for a generous phase-in period to allow industry sufficient time to develop and install pollution controls. Thus, costs are considered by EPA when setting a standard. This phase-in period also allows EPA to reconsider its standards if, as time passes, EPA finds that the technology is not yet ready. In the 1990 amendments to the Clean Air Act, EPA promulgated its Tier 1 emission standards. This required, beginning in 1994, that 40% of all vehicles sold had to meet an emission standard that emitted 35% less hydrocarbons and 60% less nitrogen oxides compared to 1990 vehicles. Tier 2 standards began in 2004 and required further reductions in hydrocarbons and nitrogen oxides. Manufacturers could meet these standards by selling vehicle models that on average met the more stringent standards. So, some vehicle models could be more stringent or less stringent, but on average had to comply with the advanced emission standards. This is an example of an engine emission regulation. On top is an example of light-duty vehicles that are classified as clean vehicles. The 4 columns on the right side are the target pollutants, and the rows below are the emission limits. Particulate matter is not listed because these vehicles do not emit particulate matter. The table on bottom has different emission limits for cars driven 5 years or 50,000 miles, or 10 years or 100,000 miles. This recognizes that as cars age, they cannot maintain the same emission limits as when first manufactured. Let's move on to the second major area of the Clean Air Act, regulating fuel and fuel additives. The manufacturers of these products must conduct and submit test results to EPA for review to ensure there are no public health risks or there is no impairment to the emission control devices. If EPA approves, then the fuel or fuel additive is registered by EPA. The Clean Air Act mandates reformulated gasoline in at least the 9 metro areas that had the highest levels of ozone pollution at the time of the 1990 amendments. That measure has since been adopted more broadly. Reformulated means that the gasoline meets certain requirements designed to improve air quality. Oxygenated gasoline, typically containing ethanol, is required in more than 40 areas where carbon monoxide exceeded the health standard. Regulating fuels has produced successful outcomes. When I worked in EPA's air program, we issued rules for diesel trucks. These trucks had to install a device to trap particulate matter, while sulfur in diesel fuel was clogging up the traps, so we had to write the rule to also reduce sulfur in diesel fuel, which became known as ultra-low sulfur diesel fuel. This rule came with costs though, over $5 billion in industry costs, an increase of $200 per vehicle, and a small increase in fuel costs. But let's look at the benefits. This ultimately came out to $25 billion in health benefits. But not all of EPA's regulations have been as successful. The removal of lead from gasoline was a good thing. We knew for a long time that lead was harmful, but EPA gave the industry over 20 years to phase lead out. During this time, the industry was able to replace lead with other additives to prevent engine problems. One of these additives was MTBE. EPA then learned that MTBE corroded through gas tanks and seeped into groundwater supplies, which severely contaminated the groundwater and cost a great deal of money To remediate, EPA swapped out one problem for another. MTBE was quickly banned by many states and the federal government moved to ban it. MTBE was later replaced by ethanol as an oxygenate. The third major part of the Mobile Source program are the Vehicle Performance and Control programs. One example of this are onboard vapor recovery systems. This is a method to capture gas that evaporates when you fuel your car. This evaporation contains volatile organic compounds, and the law requires a 95% capture of this evaporation. There are two techniques to reduce this evaporation. One is a device installed on the car, which traps fumes and redirects them back into the engine. The other is a device on the gas station hose, which applies a suction mechanism to draw fumes back into the station tanks. The Clean Air Act generally preempts states from setting their own vehicle emission standards. It would be absurd to have 50 different state vehicle emission standards. The industry can never survive if it had to build 50 different models. But since the state of California established its own vehicle emission standards before the 1970 Clean Air Act, Congress carved out an exception for the state. If California determines that its law is at least as strict as the federal law, then EPA will usually approve the waiver. EPA can deny a waiver under three scenarios: if the state standard is arbitrary and capricious, if the state doesn't have a compelling need for a more stringent standard, or if the state law is inconsistent with the authority in the Clean Air Act. Denials are rare. It's only happened once before the Trump era, and that was reversed a couple years later. Of course, as you know, the Trump administration recently denied California's greenhouse gas rules for vehicles. This is currently in litigation. I find it hard to believe the administration will be able to prevail, since it doesn't appear that California has met the conditions for a denial. Finally, other states can adopt California's emission standards as long as it's identical, and the state provides a 2-year lead time for industry to comply. Currently, 13 states and the District of Columbia have done this.